Hello, I'm Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to another program on spirituality. Today in the studio, I'm thrilled to have back as my guest again at this table for the third time, I believe, is the ever-popular Joseph Dispenza, former founding director of the Motion Picture Arts Department at the College of Santa Fe, and back in town from his sojourn to Mexico. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. I invited Joseph is here to speak at the Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality on the College of Santa Fe, and he's here to share with us his brand new book, God on Your Own, Finding a Spiritual Path Outside of Religion. Very provocative title. I just finished it. It's quite a book.
Thank you.
Joseph, we'll have to let them go to your website to find out your background because there's so much to talk about. I'm not going to even go there at the moment. So
sure.
Please watch the credits and go to www.lifepathsretreat.com. Retreats, plural.com, and you'll find out all the information about Joseph, but we want to get right into this. Joseph, why did you write this book?
Well, I wrote God on Your Own because there are 53,000 people in the United States every week who leave organized religion. And this has added up in the past 10 years to 14 million Americans who have left organized religion. When people leave organized religion, often they think that they're sort of off the hook spiritually. And I'm writing the book to help those people to understand that they have an obligation and the privilege to live a spiritually informed life, not to just sit on the spiritual couch, but to actually get out there and to forge a spiritual path on their own. And thus the subtitle of the book, Finding a Spiritual Path Outside Religion. I'm really not speaking that much to people who are in religion and happy with being in an organized religion and following that as a personal spiritual path. I'm really talking to people who have become disenchanted with that, who feel under or malnourished by it, who feel in some way that it's not answering their needs, and often in our culture we think that, well, you're in an organized religion or you're an atheist. And in our particular times, you're in organized religion or you're unpatriotic. But that's just not the case. More and more people, there are about 30 million people now in the United States who consider themselves outside of religion, and only 1 million consider themselves atheists. So there are 29 million people running around out there looking for some kind of spiritual path.
Well, that's true, and we've known a lot of them ourselves. Both of us have been in religious life at one time, and then we've been out of it as well, out of even practicing the faith. What was your experience after, as you say in the book, you lived a monastic life from your late teens, early 20s for 8 years, so you had a real insider's look, but it was at the tail end of the old church time of pre-Vatican II.
Yes.
So you really got a taste of the old world, didn't you?
I entered religious life, became a professional religious. I was a monk, or at that time called brothers. I was a brother of Holy Cross for 8 years. And when I entered monastic life, 1960, out of high school, the altar was facing one way, and at the end of my monastic experience, the altar was facing the other way, the way it is now. So what intervened in the meantime was Vatican II, which was a tremendous, as John the 23rd said, There's a tremendous opening of the windows. He said, I'm going to open the windows. And no one knew at that time what was going to fly in or what was going to fly out. It was a very courageous move on his part, particularly for a man of his advanced age. But anyway, he did that. He opened the windows, and a lot of new fresh air came in. I stayed in monastic life until 1968, until it stopped. The vocation to me seemed stalled and kind of at an end. And I was seeing my spiritual advisor for about 2 years before I left. And it was getting increasingly clear that my vocation probably was a temporary vocation, that I had got what I needed and that I needed to move on. And I did, and left my faith at the same time. And then over the years began dipping back into Catholicism and also into other religious traditions to see what I could get there to make my own spiritual path. I have great respect still for the Catholic religion and all of the organized religions for their spiritual content. I disagree terribly with the concept of my God is the correct God and your God is not. I think that's gotten us into a terrible lot of trouble over the years, over the centuries, the millennia. I think the war that we're fighting at the moment is a religious war, basically, between two fundamentalist religious positions, evangelical Christianity and fundamentalist Islam. So if you look through the ages, you see some of the shortcomings, really, of organized religion. But I have great respect for the spiritual content when we can find it there, and as we find it there.
Well, as I understand the Gospels say that we all have a duty to seek, knock, and ask. And if we're doing those things, then we're on the spiritual path. If not, then it's often just a facade. And I'm happy to report in the last 25 years I've been practicing Catholicism, I haven't heard anybody, go out of the way to say that my God is the only God, et cetera, and that there doesn't seem to be much conflict around here with that. But you're right, and politics has played a big part of that, along with economics and the rest of it. But you go farther than that. I mean, your experiences outside the church are sometimes some of the most fascinating, in a sense, because you have experienced the Spirit and experienced different elements of the spiritual life that were significantly different than what you described in your monastic time under vows. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I have a chapter in the book on peak experience, and I recommend that to people. I recommend that to everyone, people who are following a spiritual path in an organized religion and those who are not. What I mean by peak experience, you get that from Maslow, by the way, and who came up with human needs. There's a hierarchy of 5 human needs that he talks about in one of his books. And the peak experience is one of those, that we need that to jumpstart us in a new direction, give us energy to bounce us into a new place. And in the spiritual realm, that simply means that we seek out experiences that will that promise to enlighten us and lift us into a new area. I talk in the book about fire walking, for instance. I'm not suggesting this to everybody in the audience because, or falling out of an airplane or doing these things. These are rather extreme. But in my case, the fire walking, which I talk about a bit, helped me overcome my terror of being burned alive. I think maybe I picked it up in some past lifetime. It's probably a witch. And but I don't know which witch was, just, So was fearing being burned, and instead of being burned was not. And at the end of that, felt a tremendous exhilaration, and really for a long time after that understood experientially the unity of all living things. I felt totally connected to my creative source. And that feeling and that really cellular feeling stayed with me for a very, very long time. And there are other things that I've done that where I pushed myself to try to get to that place where I can experience directly the connection with the divine. And that has helped me a great deal. So I recommend it for people who are going to Mass every Sunday and doing the sacraments and so forth, and people who are not doing that.
Well, it's been my experience that both of them are helpful. I think some of the important things that I read in your book is in this whole concept of the new paradigm, because as you mentioned, a lot of people are no longer practicing their faith of origin. They've given up on organized religion for various reasons. Many of them are valid, and they have now been looking elsewhere. I know this show is dedicated to those people as well, and help them in their spiritual life, and we don't pretend to know what the best spiritual life for them is. That's part of their path to find that out. But you found some things, and you discovered some things, you talked about things that give ample example that there is a new paradigm here, and I don't think it's fully well developed yet, or we can't certainly put a name on it other than there's something going on.
There's something going on. I really think that we're living through a paradigm crunch right now. We're between two places, between two worlds. And it depends on who you talk to. You talk to physicists, you talk to astrologers, you talk to shamans, it depends on who you're talking to. But everybody will say pretty much the same thing. We are in the midst of undergoing tremendous seismic changes in how we view ourselves. And I have a feeling, just a feeling, that it all started when the pictures began coming back from space. For the first time, we as a human species were able to see ourselves from outside of ourselves. And we were able to see the entire globe, the entire world. And when you see the entire Earth from a few miles out, there are no political boundaries, there are no racial boundaries, there are no boundaries of any kind. There's total unity. And Carl Sagan described it as the little blue marble, and it's just this beautiful, beautiful island planet in the middle of all of this space with a little satellite body that we have going around us, the moon. And there are pictures now from Mars, that have been taken from the surface of Mars, showing the Earth rising and then the moon rising above the Earth. It's so exciting, and I think that those pictures collectively are giving us the new the iconography for the new paradigm. The new paradigm is going to be a time of tremendous union and tremendous human cooperation. So I'm very hopeful about the future. But the old paradigm has to pass away before that can happen. And the old paradigm is full of fractionalism. How can I keep my little part of the planet, and I'll go to war for my little part of the planet and plant my flag and do all of it. And I think all of that will pass away in the next maybe not the next few years, but maybe not within our lifetimes, but I'm very hopeful for the future. Now, what this means for spirituality, organized religions may pass away or they may change. I don't think they'll be the same. They won't be recognizable as the same, in the same way that the Roman Catholic Church really is not the same at all now as it was in 1955. Right?
Well, that's for sure.
I mean,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I love to see some of those old movies. Like Bing Crosby playing, Going My Way as the archetypal priest, and who was the other, the classic nun story. And you were in religious life in the 60s, and I was in a monastic setting in the 80s, but mine was a charismatic experience at the monastery in Pecos, and it was extraordinary because all of a sudden the spiritual gifts were open and apparent, and were being used on a regular basis for healing and the rest of it. And even as late as just Monday with Mary Ann Lacey, I was given that experience of resting in the Spirit, and it was just phenomenal. I mean, and there was no hangover from alcohol or drugs, trying to do it chemically, or I wasn't starving to death, for fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, and there it was. It was just the Holy Spirit right there, giving me that very intimate experience. Yes. And also had the experience, which leads to my next question, of my parents, who are both deceased, being right there. And the first priest that gave me that experience was hovering over me. I saw him. And that whole element of the question of why are we here now, as opposed to any other time in history. Yes. Can you speak a little bit about that? You've had some experience in that area.
Maybe you can rephrase your question.
Well, the idea of, as soul beings, I think it was you who pointed out in your book on Teilhard de Chardin, talking and reminding us that we are spirit beings experiencing a human life.
Yes.
And I think that you've got it right. I think that the people in Teilhard does too, that we tend to forget that we are spirit first and foremost. And a lot of people, in whatever religious sense they are, seem to be ignoring it.
A good point. And I believe that the soul is much bigger than we've thought of it as, And my own experiences have led me to look into, for instance, past lives, past human lives. And, people can believe that or not. I know what I experienced, and I experienced these in my dreams. I thought they were dreams. I went to a dream analyst who eventually told me, after looking at the dreams, that they really were not dreams, they were past life memories, because I was haunted by a set of unusual things that were not ordinary run-of-the-mill dreams. People were dressed in a certain way, and they were saying things, they were speaking German. And I talk in the book about the most recent past life, for which I've had to do a lot of karmic healing in this life. I think, you end up in a monastery eating bread and water at the age of 18, and you say, what the heck is going on here? I'm a teenager, I should be out sowing my wild oats and all this. And I apparently was doing penance for some karmic debt that I had come in with in this previous lifetime. But I believe that the soul is like a huge diamond, if you will. And each facet on this huge diamond is a human lifetime that we have. And we don't get out of here until we've completed all of these. We've looked at all of the facets. And sometimes, who knows, there may be thousands of these that we have to go through to get the soul lessons so that the soul can truly understand the connection with the Creator. It's much, much bigger, I think, than we have imagined it to be.
I believe it. Listen, if you've just joined us, we're having a conversation with Joseph Dispenza, the author of God on Your Own, Finding a Spiritual Path Outside of Religion. It's literally just out. It's an extraordinary read, and I bring it to your attention for your consideration. Particularly if you're outside the church and you don't have a faith community or a spiritual path that you're comfortable with, I think this will be provocative reading for you. I found it as well. I had similar experiences myself with those things when I was outside the church. Past life regression with the late Helen Wambaugh and several other people leading up to Chris Griscom's Light Institute and having those experiences. And I came away feeling I'm either the greatest fiction writer I've ever thought I was, or something else was happening. I was tapping into other things. And we go on and on. But that's just one of the things that you've mentioned. In this new paradigm shift that we're in, and we see the diminution of mainline Protestant religions, and of course the Jews have been dispersed for so long in their tradition, and we have fractionalism in Islam to the max, and it seems that we have some tough road to go as yet, unless we start to really raise our consciousness as part of our spirituality and see that other person as our brother or sister in the spirit.
Yes, I think so. And just to add to that, I think that the times that are coming, what I call the new time, are going to help us in that regard, rather than to further divide us. If you talk to astrologers, for instance, they will tell you that we are at the end of the age of Pisces. And you look at the symbol of Pisces, it's two fish who are opposing each other. And this has been kind of the theme of the last 2,100 years, which is, the astrologers will tell you, is the length of an age, astrological age. That there has been this division all the time, science going in one direction, religion in another direction, this army going this way, this army going that way. So there's been tremendous division. And we are entering the age then of Aquarius, which is a humanitarian age. So there's a great deal to be hopeful for here.
And
very exciting.
Isn't one of the saints that came up with the vision that there's only a couple of popes left before the end of this age?
I think there's one more after Benedict, if you read the prophecies.
Yeah, so there are. So we have it within the church as well as the out. So it sounds like it's time to get off the couch, as you said, and get working on your spiritual life. Of course, the evidence is there. I think for those of us who grew up in the nuclear age, the old duck and cover generation, I think we've had a sense of imminent mortality that could come at any time. And we're seeing it now in the national catastrophes that are taking place. It seems like Mother Nature seems to be weighing in as well.
Well, I believe the bomb, which, the baby boomers, our generation, we are turning 60 years old at the rate of 8,000 a day in this country. 8,000 people are turning 60 every day in this culture. So the baby boomers went from 1946 to 1964. The bomb was in 1945. I believe that the bomb was a wake-up call. And our generation, the wake-up call to say, you know what, we could lose the species at this point. This is the point at which we can lose the species. Mm-hmm. And so our generation, it seems, has a tremendous obligation then. We were born with the obligation to somehow bring things together on the planet. And I talk about in the last chapter of the book, bringing heaven down to earth. And I mean that in a literal way, that we have this, this responsibility to make, we've thought of earth as a waiting room for heaven, but really, we really need to bring heaven down to the planet and take care of our planet.
Well, I'm reminded of the late John Paul II, now largely being called John Paul the Great, and his worldwide effort to bring hope literally to the world, and he seemed to do it. And I was touched by his funeral. I don't think there's ever been a greater gathering of world leaders ever, anywhere. And it was for this vicar of Christ, this guy who's, we know who his superior is, who he answers to. And I think there was something symbolic in that, because you saw literal enemies, sitting just a row or two away, peacefully existing to honor this man who had spent his life under difficult conditions, and under Nazism and then communism and family death early in the game, and yet just kept. Don't fear, A Witness to Hope, I think was one of his books. You being a former insider into the church, and now you have been surveying the field sort of outside, where do you think, for instance, the church will have to go to be more responsive to this mystical dimension within all of us that has to be more fully expressed in the world?
Well, who knows? I mean, I'm not an expert in that. It's interesting when you were talking about John Paul the Great, and I talk about him in the book briefly, about his funeral and about the fact that there were untold hundreds of thousands of people who descended on Rome during that time. And they were, I was very interested. The CNN was going around and asking people, why are you here? More than half of them were not Catholics. And even the Catholics, among them, were saying things like, well, of course, I don't agree about birth control, and I gays and things like, well, then why are you here? Well, they were there because they admired his personal spiritual commitment, his personal spiritual journey, which was, as you point out, magnificent. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It really was a magnificent human journey, full of humanitarianism. I think that John Paul personified this paradigm crunch that I'm talking about in the spiritual realm. Because on one side of him was the hardliner who appropriately, of course, was laying down the law, and this is the way it's done, and this is the way you have to obey, and all of that. And the other side of him was this humanitarian, all-embracing, I mean, he was forever going off to Africa, to Mexico, to all these places, and embracing the people, embracing the children, and trying to really embrace the entire globe. You could see if he could hug the world, he would do that. I mean, it's sort of like Amachi, isn't it? Just these huge hugs. So, so maybe the church will go in that direction, more in that humanitarian direction.
Yeah. And also outside the church, you named, if you just, once again, Joseph Dispenza, God on Your Own, Finding a Spiritual Path Outside Religion. You named, everyone that you named had an influence on me. That whole list of people that influenced you, that were the teachers for the masses out there, up to and including the Dalai Lama, who came to New Mexico many years ago and gave them the greatest talk on compassion I had ever heard, and had people just spellbound. And for whatever reason, people might not be able to listen to their rabbi or their priest or their minister, but they would listen to this man in the robes,
yes,
talking about it, giving the greatest Christian message without having to mention Christ. It was extraordinary. So we do have a lot of help. People are weighing in, and all the Indian gurus that came from India to evangelize, in a sense, the spiritual life of literally our generation.
Yes.
That's something remarkable.
Yes. And we live in a tremendously exciting time. We live in a time of the internet.
Yes.
Which is an Aquarian idea. It creates alliances and networks. It creates what Teilhard called the noosphere, if you remember. It's the human layer of the layer of human consciousness that is just above the stratosphere of the planet, and it's invisible, but it is a real thing.
Yeah. Well, listen, we've come to the end of this session. I want to thank you for coming all the way back from old Mexico to New Mexico, to your former home, having lived here for 24 years and being an influence in the community and in my life and many others. So I want to thank you for that. And I know you were well received at the College of Santa Fe's Institute for Spirituality. It was great to have you back there on campus. So in the last minute we have remaining, what would you like to tell the folks outside of buy Joseph's book and read it and share it with your friends, because it'll break a lot of conversation out there, things you may not have thought of. But I've read two of his other books, and I think this is clearly the most provocative and thought-provoking. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you. It's a spiritual memoir, so of course it's my personal experience, and
very
people
personal.
have to understand that. I'm writing it from my experience.
Well, I want to credit you, because the courage you showed. I mean, now the emperor has no clothes. You may still have your briefs on, but you've exposed so much of yourself in this book. I want to thank you for your courage for that.
Thank you very much.
Forgive the metaphor. So on behalf of everybody here at Spirituality TV, I want to thank you for viewing. I want to thank our director, Marshall, our camera people, Tom and Wendy, and technical assistants from Michael, and everybody behind the scenes. And good luck on the rest of your book tour.
Thank you very much.
And we hope you'll stay tuned next week at this time for another program on spirituality.